continue onward here. We've got our next speaker. She's been with FACCT for, I can't remember how many years, but it's been a long time. She's been faithful to us, and she's got several ministries she's a part of. But Dr. Sandy McKenzie, she's a licensed pastoral counselor. She's a chaplain and a life coach. And you've spoken many times in many different places, but we're blessed to have her speak for us here today. You can read more about her bio in the handout that was provided for you when you arrived here. But let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Sandy McKenzie as she speaks for us here.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. And yes, it has been a number of years. Dr. Nussbaumer saved my life. Because I moved down from Tennessee, if you're wondering why I have this mountain twang. And I thought, oh, I was a member of the Georgia Association. And I went to see him. I said, how can I get my license changed? He said, well, you got to do this, this, and this. And I thought, I don't want him to change his mind. I remember running out of there over at Howey in the Hills and ran down to Kissimmee to pick up some more things. He didn't change his mind. I appreciate that. So, but I do want to thank Dr. Nussbaumer and Kevin, Pastor Kevin. Who are we missing? Oh, your assistant there, Beth. And so just thank you for having me. I know you all came, you did, quite a ways. I was thinking last night when I was putting a few extra notes together, there was a study done, this has been years ago, but it was done by the author of a book called In Search of Excellence. It was a big, hot book on what makes people excellent, the best people of the best organizations, and he found that they did what you're doing today. They actually came out and attended the association meetings and went to situations like this where they could learn a little bit more and help other people. But anyway, just wanted to tell you, you have the qualities of the best if you didn't already know that. I want to share some, to me, alarming information, and it's big on my heart, helping victims of emotionally abusive relationships. A lot of people think it's physical abuse is the big hot thing, but it's not. We're going to get into that. But I was particularly, my heart's touched for this because I was trained as a child to be a good victim. And our culture often trains children, and I'm sure in your work. So I was taught, you don't talk about anything that happened to you. We don't do that in our family. If you did tell them that somebody touched you or a relative did this or that, I got reprimanded. What did you do to cause it? Some of you have heard these things. What did you do? So I learned to keep my mouth shut and take it, and then on top of that, we were supposed to hug and be nice to those people at the family reunion and act like we liked it. Well, I was perfectly trained to be with an emotional abuser because I would just smile and look like everything was wonderful, and emotional abusers like people who keep their mouth shut. So I went through the training to be emotionally abused, and then I was in emotionally abusive relationships, and I did not know what to do. And it's a bigger issue than most people realize, and I want to share a little bit of that because as I went to counselors and pastors, even lawyers, they typically don't know how to deal with these victims, and they hurt them more. They hurt them more with the things they say. For example, what did you do to cause it? Well, you must have done this. Or it takes two to tango. No, it doesn't. It only takes one to be an abuser. So as I started looking at statistics a little bit, one of them, and that's right there at the very beginning on your handout sheet, of all the calls to the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and there are hundreds of thousands of calls, what percent are for emotional abuse? 95% of the calls are people in distress because they're being emotionally abused. That's huge. So it's not, I say emotional abuse is physical abuse because of all the things it does to your mind and your body and your spirit, and it can kill you. And we'll look at that in just a minute too. So a lot of calls, a lot of people in distress, and this one is sickening. Of the couples sitting in your church that look so wonderful and upstanding, one of those couples, of every 4 couples sitting in the pews, there is typically one person who is being emotionally abused secretly, covertly. And what is so sad about this and makes it difficult for the victim is the person doing the abusing, the covert abuser, is very upstanding looking to all the people in church. They're the ones up there jumping up and down praising the Lord sometimes. And everyone thinks, wow, what a wonderful, wonderful person. And then at home, they're abusing their spouse. Now, I'm focusing a little bit on marriages right now, but emotional abuse can be any romantic relationship. But also, as an executive coach, I was an executive coach for many years, I would go into corporations and they would set me up in a boardroom and send me an employee every hour that they were having some issues with. They wanted them to perform better. And as I was working with these employees, I noticed that about 1 in 5, maybe 1 in 4, 5, or 6, was distracted at work, not doing a good job, getting a bad reputation, and these were highly qualified people because they were being emotionally abused at home. And I worked with a lot of accountants when I was in Tennessee. One man he was a lawyer, and he was a certified public accountant. He was a state certified planner. He was amazing, but he was at work, they would make fun of him. He couldn't quite get it together. He was always running a little bit behind. He was distracted. He'd get phone calls from home. He was being emotionally abused at home. There was another one who was being emotionally abused by their adult child who had come back home to live with them. And you know, the parent was trying to help them, but the adult child took over and was mean. So you've seen that. They're mean to the parents and always causing chaos, and the phone's ringing at work. So that kind of abuse, and these people who are abused get beaten down. So, but it's by usually, of course, adult child is a little more obvious, but in churches, it's horrific. And even though I was trained to be a good victim, and I was studying this, I get fooled. It is very, very difficult to spot this. I have had the abuser come in for counseling when I was counseling at a church, and they'll cry and tell me how wonderful they are and how terrible their spouse is, and you have to watch it, you get caught up in it. So it's a very tricky situation. I had another woman, and she's still out there doing this. She always found a counselor or a pastor. She'd switch churches and try to find a new pastor that would take up for her. But she was the abuser. And her husband, and it goes both ways. I see about 65% of women are abused because often the man has a little more power and financially in other ways. And about, let's say 60% women and 40% men are abused. But this particular lady came to me for counseling about her marriage, and oh, she was beautiful, polished, professional, and just pouring out her heart about how abusive her husband was. And it was the first meeting, and I just gave her a couple of thoughts, and she wasn't sure she wanted to do it. Well, eventually, he found me also, and they started coming to me, and as I watched them, I felt so sorry for her the first time. She was the abuser. And
Borderline personality disorder.
sometimes you have that. That's horrible. But it's not always that, and I'm glad you said that, because we do want to look at why these abusers do it. And that could be one, not chemical imbalance, but there's some other reasons too. But the weapons of the abuse are varied. But I have found that lawyers don't understand this. They'll say to the victim who finally comes in desperately, well, if he or she was so bad, why did you wait so long? That just hurts the victim more. They don't think anybody will believe them. Counselors. I see things in counseling magazines. I see things on Christian television where they're giving advice on marriage, and it's just not strong enough. Yours is different. You're here to talk to us, doctor, about reviving marriages. This is different. This is different. So I want to help bring awareness to you to be aware that you're going to want to believe the perpetrator. You're not naturally tending to believe the victim, because the perpetrator usually has a more religious reputation. So it's, I wanted to warn you a little bit about that. Now, all kinds, and I hope you will get the book. I'm not pushing you to buy my book. I've already bought these, I've paid for them, and I've got, shipping, but I think every church needs one of these books, and you may know people who need one. Counselors need it. We need one in our FACCT office, just to bring the awareness. So what are some of the ways that people are abused? I see a lot of spiritual abuse. That's where the perpetrator tells, and it's brainwashing, folks. They tell them so much that the victim begins to believe it. So someone who was maybe self-confident or pretty confident and healthy marries an abuser, and it's not long before they get so beaten down by the brainwashing, they lose their esteem, they lose their destiny, even that, things that the Lord had for them to do, their gifts and talents, because that's been torn down. But you will see brainwashing, you don't pray enough, that's why this marriage is in trouble. They blame the victim. There's financial abuse, and it's the one reason that a lot of people stay and can't get out. It's the number one reason that people get stuck, financial. Because they get intertwined, and they may have a couple of children maybe, their finances are intermingled, and it's hard, they don't know how they're going to do it. So they end up feeling trapped, but there's ways around that too. There is just plain old mental brainwashing, as I mentioned. There's rejection, abandonment. The perpetrator disappears for a few days, and the victim doesn't tell anyone because the victim's embarrassed. So we've got that abandonment. Maybe one goes to events at church and leaves the victim at home still getting ready. And they sneak off and go to church or to an event, and they tell people that the victim had other plans. They lie. So they do that. They hurt their reputation. There are more ways. They're all listed. Not all. There's so many we can't list them all. But there are numerous ways that people are emotionally abused, psychologically, mentally, and it eventually takes a little toll. So I wanted you to consider one thing that does throw us off when we're trying to work with a victim. And by the way, I want to mention this before I forget it. This is my personal style, but when I have a call from a couple that's having issues, and I don't quite know all of it, I ask them on their first session to come in separately. Because if one is being abused, they will not open up in front of the other. They'll get bashed in the car. The abuser will be nice to them in front of the counselor. And then they get in the car and bawl them out, leave them, reject them, curse them, scream out. It's horrible. So I try to just kind of piece it together by seeing them separately. It's quicker.
What are some examples? I think I heard you said one thing, but I'm not sure of that. What are some examples of spiritual abuse?
Just battering them, telling them God doesn't like them. I've heard people say, well, I'm not even sure you're saved. I'm not sure God's very happy with you. I mean, they judge. They bring up junk from way back when that's already been dealt with, so they continue to condemn them over things that were already dealt with. And then this person begins to see and believe that God is mad at them, and that they don't. Maybe they're not even one of his children, because the perpetrator tells them how bad they are.
Have you ever got in a situation where you counsel? Because sometimes the perpetrator, as you know, they themselves have some major issues.
Sure.
So have you ever, how does that look when you counsel a perpetrator? How does that? Has the...
Okay, you're getting me a little ahead of myself.
Okay.
Let's look at that. Actually, it will be the one who reaches out to you first, 99% of the time, is the victim. The perpetrator doesn't want to go to counseling. The perpetrator is a wolf in sheep's clothing. And they reeled the victim in by being all sweet and wearing their little sheep outfit. And now that they have them and they're, well, I want to answer more of that other question. I have seen and heard perpetrators tell the victim, if you let anyone at church know the truth, I'll divorce you so fast your head will spin. You'll see what I do to you. I think it's the evil one trying to derail people who have great potential for the kingdom. And this perpetrator tells them how they're no good, what you said about this or that, or you taught a Sunday school class. They will stop speaking to the victim. Maybe a week before they're going to teach the victim's going to maybe teach a Sunday school class or something. The victim will try to derail them so they cannot perform, that their heart is so broken when they stand up and try to do whatever the Lord has set up for them to do. They're so heartbroken they can barely even get there. So that's another way. But now I've forgotten where I was going. So what do you say? So typically the perpetrator will only actively be involved in 1 or 2 sessions, then they start having excuses. They don't want to be there. They did it just for show. They want to be able to say to everyone at church, I went to counsel, it just didn't do any good. You hear that? The perpetrator will not divorce the victim. They want to abuse the victim so much that the victim leaves, and then the perpetrator can say, oh, I was fine. I didn't want this. He did. And they're always putting on their show about how wonderful they are. Okay, did that kind of get into where you were going? Yeah, I wanted to add this before I forgot. Reactive defense, that's on your sheet in number 3. Occasionally, you will have a victim who has taken it, been beaten down, their heart is broken, they're wrecked, they're sick, they're shaking, they're confused, their esteem is shot, and here comes another surprise attack. And occasionally, if they are so worn down, they will do something or say something that they later regret. And that is not abuse. That's called reactive defense. And I try to get them to protect themselves so they don't get that worn down. They'll say something, they do things. I have one right now I'm working with virtually, and she was so lonely and beaten down and told how pathetic she was. She was prime candidate for an affair. And she had a one-time fling. Okay. She now is horrified that she did it. It was a reactive thing that was totally unlike her. Now she's just covered up with guilt and shame, and God doesn't love me, and I can't do anything for him. So that's one of the heartbreaking parts. But it happens. You know, I wonder if the Samaritan woman, with how many of them just left her, abused her, because back then you wouldn't want to run off the husband in that culture. You needed it. So there she was, and she was carrying the shame. And she was carrying the embarrassment. But all that aside, under point number 3, and I was hoping our lawyer would stay here, because if you were in court, you might be able to use this. I don't know, Dr. Nussbaum, I need to stay out of your arena. But emotion, a fight or a squabble is not emotional abuse. Every relationship has a blip on the screen. But emotional abuse is cyclical. Cyclical, it happens again, and then everything gets good. There's a process in this, and it's in the book, so you'll recognize it. The perpetrator will do something horrible to the victim. The victim is crushed. Then the perpetrator gets kind of nice, sucks him back in. Then when the victim is feeling, relaxed, things have changed, everything's going to be all right, guess what? That's when, boom, any little thing, they'll even make up something to quit speaking to them, scream at them, leave for the day or the night or whatever, and they'll always blame the victim. So it's cyclical. A good example of it, and the Bible is full. By the way, this book is packed with scripture. I tried to keep it as scriptural as I could based on, so I do want to, I'm hoping it will be in churches. Samson and Delilah. Okay, here is supposedly, well, he was, a man gifted by the Lord to do wonderful things. Delilah, now he did have a problem with women, I'll have to say that. But Delilah, and this is the other part, not only is it cyclical, they are without empathy. So let's say the perpetrator is getting right up in the victim's face, never touches them, but the victim falls backward, and it's on the floor, maybe hurt themselves. The perpetrator will have no empathy. The perpetrator will start accusing them of faking. It just gets worse. There's no sympathy at all. They always go back, well, I didn't touch you. And by the way, I did see that one time, where the perpetrator got right up in the victim's face, had her cornered in the kitchen, screaming at her so much that spit was hitting her face. And although she had no history of being abusive, she pushed him and said, stop. Okay, he goes, oh, you bruised me. He calls 911 and says, I never touched her, and look what she did to me. You see? It gets all twisted up. So the victim may do things that are not characteristic for them. That's one. So don't feel sorry for the perpetrator when the victim has a one-time blip right there. If it's cyclical, there's no empathy. I don't think Delilah had any empathy for Samson. And there's usually a motive. She wanted money. She wanted to sell his secret for his strength. But the odd thing about that is he never catches on. Yeah. This is cyclical, and he keeps going back. And she must have lured him with promises of sweet favorites. And he's right back in there, and then she does it again and again. So that's one emotional abuse. So I say in the book, he was blinded by love, literally, because they did put out his eyes. There are several cases, scripturally, of a lot of cases. Tamar and Judah. I don't know if you remember that story, but she married, I think Judah was probably wealthy, married one of his sons, and the Bible doesn't give us a lot of details, but he prevented her from conceiving, but enjoyed doing it in the process, and the scripture says he was evil, and the Lord let him die. Okay. Now in that culture, they needed children, they needed a family, or they were just out in the cold. They needed that for security. So, according to their tradition, he was to give her to the next son. He did the same thing. So now she's been emotionally abused twice. He was evil. The Lord let him die. She has no children. She goes to Judah. Now what? And he kind of tricks her. Well, when this son's ready, we'll let you marry him. But he never did it. And if you've read the story, he even banned her from remarrying and told her she couldn't have children. She had to stay a widow, and which pretty much ruined her life. Now, in this abusive case, and I always work with my victims to pray first. We go to the Lord. By the way, I pray at the beginning of my session, I pray at the end, and occasionally they'll go, oh, I didn't know you were Christian. And I said, no, don't worry about that. I haven't done it myself. I've thought about it, But, so here she is, and she's taken matters in her own hand. There's no evidence she went to the Lord for guidance. And if you know the story, she dressed up as the lady of the evening, and she wanted to prove that she was not so bad and Judah was bad. So, as you may remember from the story, he passed by her on the street, she seduced him, and he never realized it was her. She took his ring and his staff to keep his collateral, and then the word got around, Tamar's pregnant. And when Judah heard it, he was furious. He knew she had been out there doing things he told her not to do, and he actually declared to have her burned at the stake, have her burned, and that's when she produced. Now she took a huge risk. That was probably not, neither one of them, I would say, were living in God's precepts. But that one turned out okay, because the perpetrator, Judah, acknowledged. That's a rare one. He acknowledged what he had done. He even said, she's more righteous than I. Yes. And so we know that baby, she had twins, that was in the line to Jesus. So the Lord worked that out. The Lord is merciful when we do mess up. And a lot of the victims mess up.
Amen.
So, they're told they're trash. And one example I have on the back of the book, and I'm sorry I didn't bring it, is you've seen those bowls that have been broken and repaired with gold in the cracks. That's how I look at these victims. They're broken, they're shattered, they think they're trash, because we usually throw a broken bowl away. But if we can get them turned around to see God's love, they can have a whole new life. But we'll wrap up with that in a minute. So we know we can define it. Any questions? Because, okay, I want to go to point 4. A lot of stories in the Bible of abuse. Oh, here's one of my favorites. Joseph. He was abused. You remember the coat of many colors, and his family was jealous of him, his brothers, and they sold him into slavery. Human trafficking, that's a crime. Sent him to another country. He's pathetic. He's a slave, but he always keeps his side of the street clean. He never becomes like the perpetrator. And that is something we have to look out for. sometimes when a victim is in this kind of relationship for a long period of time, they can become like the perpetrator or want to fight fire with fire. And we hope to get them some help before they do that. Okay, so few resources for these people. They might go to a friend who knows both of them. The friend tells the victim, how nice the perpetrator is to us. Of course, they don't believe the victim is perpetrator, but they will say to a victim, well, they're always so nice to us. Everyone loves them. So now people think the victim is nuts. So you can't do that. You've got to believe them. And what I wanted to share with you is how to help these victims. One, I get them separated. And usually I will say this. If there actually is emotional abuse going on in that relationship, the perpetrator likes to have separate sessions, because in that session, the perpetrator, whether it's male or female, starts sucking me in and telling me how horrible the victim is. And they won't do that quite as blatantly if they're in there together. It's sad. It's a sad situation.
And Dr. Sandy, when that happens, how long do you entertain their speech before you may interject something or voice your concern?
I'll start doing it right away. I'll say, now tell me that again. Let me make sure I understand. I'll say it back. But thank you for asking that, Kevin, because there's a couple of things you want to do if you have this situation. Number one, listen to the victim. Listen to the victim. And believe them. Do not say anything that indicates they're not telling you the truth. Well, there's two sides to every story. No, that implies that the victim is just as responsible. That is not true. The victims usually love their perpetrator. They're doing everything they can to make this relationship work. They'll say to me, what did I do? We were just laughing and I just made his or her favorite meal. Everything was going great, and all of a sudden, the victim didn't do anything. The perpetrator's looking for a reason to explode. So listen to your victim, believe them, and don't blame them. 3 D's right there. Okay. Don't go, you'll want to, don't go to the abuser and have a little talk with them. Do you know why? Why would you not do that? Because they're going to go back to their victim and say, you told the pastor what's going on, and now the abuse comes on even stronger. Don't do it unless that victim is 1,000% prepared to leave. You just can't do it. It will hurt the victim if you tell them. I had one lady, she was actually a little bit abusive, but she went to the pastor. The pastor brought in a couple other people in the church. They listened to her story, and when she left, they called her husband and said, we just thought you needed to know your wife's in here telling lies about you. That happens. So she was, super beat up. Okay. So you listen to them. You don't hold them responsible for changing the perpetrator. I've heard pastors say, well, little lady, you just need to go home and pray more and be more subservient. Maybe some of you have said that or heard that. Well, here's the thing. They've already done that. They've been praying. They've been subservient. They're doing everything they can. They are married to someone who is evil, and eventually you can die from emotional abuse. abuse. I wanted to mention a little bit some of the side effects earlier. They have gastrointestinal upset, they have mental confusion, their steam is shot, and a study that has also come out recently is broken heart syndrome. Now, you've all heard, I'm a grief counselor too, you've heard of a couple who had a good marriage and one of them dies, and soon after the grief is so deep the other one dies. That's for broken heart syndrome. It weakens your heart muscle. So what happens in these abusive relationships, because they're cyclical, it's awful. The perpetrator reels them back in with love and promises and sweet talk just when the victim thinks, oh, everything's good, oh thank goodness, and they're starting to laugh and share some of their stories. The perpetrator just absolutely annihilates them again. Maybe they leave, they reject them, they won't tell them where they are. It's awful. The silent treatment, by the way, is one of the worst weapons of abuse, because there's no way to fix it when nobody will speak to you. And you're rejected, you're on the outside. It's totally helpless. Okay. So what happens if as it's cyclical, as that victim begins to relax and be happy, when the perpetrator comes in and blows them away again, they grieve. Oh, I thought everything was good. No, I don't have a marriage. It is over. My spouse is gone. My spouse does hate me. So they go into that grieving. Now, if it's happening every, 6 weeks, we'll just take that number. It could be 2 months, could be 4 weeks, 3 weeks. They're grieving just as severely as the death of a spouse, again and again. So that heart muscle is weakening and weakening and weakening. And eventually, you can die from broken heart syndrome as one does. So it's a serious, serious situation. How's our time? Okay. So we don't want to confront the abuser. When they come to me, I try to ask questions, as Pastor Kevin asked, to get them to have an awareness. And occasionally, I would say maybe 10% of abusers, it's rare, just about 10%, really don't know they're doing it, and they want to change and they don't want to lose the relationship. Especially if the victim finally got some strength and recovery, and the victim is saying, no more. I'm not doing this. It's killing me. We're going to have to separate. I have to leave. That's a wake-up call for some abusers, and they'll call me. I've had that happen many times. In 2 cases, the husband called me immediately, and the wife had already said, I'm out here. He didn't want to lose her. See, they don't want to lose this person who is so subservient and does everything they want them to do. And the victim is usually a pretty good catch. That's why they reeled him in the first place. So one man came to me, he says, I don't want to lose her. And so he kept working on steps to get her back, and their marriage is phenomenal today. The other one, he was an Adventist, and he wanted to, I know, I figured your ears perked up on that. I see Adventist, I see all, if they want to come to me. So he said, I'm coming, I need to come in Saturday. I said, well, that's your worship day. And he said, no, I'm coming. I want to know what I'm doing that's so abusive. I care about her, and I just talk to her like I talk to my golfing buddies. And I said, yeah, that's just too harsh for her. So he said, okay, come in. He said, show me what abuse is. And I showed him. And he said, let me take a screenshot of that. He did that. He said, that's it. I know what it is now. I don't want to do that. It changed, just like that, with awareness. So that can change.
Dr. Sandy, when you don't see brokenness on the part of the abuser, or their lack of willingness to come forward and take ownership for their role, you don't spend a lot of time chasing them down and to get them to return to come see you as much as focusing on the victim and empowering them.
Exactly. Thank you. This book is not, there are a lot of books out there on abuse, emotional abuse. A lot of them are bashing the bully. Oh, I'm married to a narcissist. All that. What I can say smart back to them to shut them up. No, this is not that. No, this is focusing on the victim. Thank you. You cannot change. Thank you for that. You cannot change this abuser until they want to change.
But I think what I was asking earlier, and what Pastor Kevin just mentioned, what if the abuser, have you ever had an experience where the abuser open up, break down, and say, you know what, hey, I own my behavior.
Right.
And then,
these two that I mentioned.
yeah,
These two
because as you know, Doctor, that the abuser, of course, they have their brokenness.
Absolutely.
There's something that's driving them to cause them to behave that way.
Right.
So,
Okay, what makes an abuser abuse someone who loves them? That's another thing. Now, here, this is my personal philosophy. I hope I don't get kicked out of FACCT for this. But that the victim will usually make excuses for the abuser. Well, he grew up in an alcoholic home, and he did. Fine, yeah, we've all gone through stuff.
right.
But my view is, you're grown up now, you're not a little kid at home, it's time for you to look at yourself and get fixed. So but unless they want to, I have one right now, just one excuse after the other. Well, she makes me like this. She's abusive to me, that's why I don't speak. No, she's not. But she's not doing everything you want. And sometimes abusers just have to dominate. They would probably, it doesn't matter that you recover. The abuser may have grown up in a home that's what happened, and that's all they know. We've got that. Sometimes if they've grown up in an alcoholic home and the alcoholic was very abusive to all the kids and to the other parent, you will have a drive-along. You've heard that expression? That's where someone, now, I would never touch alcohol. Daddy drank, we would never do it. I'm pure. And all that. They're dry drunks anyway. They still have those angry fits. They may not be drinking alcohol to trigger it, but it's being triggered from their lack of self-examination. And self-examination has to be done on both parts, of course. But it can be cured. There are few, but I don't hold out a whole lot of hope. If someone is being mistreated and they're dying, pretty much dying, they're going to the ER with chest pains, they've been told from the EKG they've just had a little heart attack, and it's that kind of stress, and the children are seeing it. And I will tell you this, the parent who put up with the abuse, one day the children grow up and ask that parent, why didn't you ever stand up for yourself? So you've set another bad example there. I call that kind of what is it, generational? It's time to stop the generational curses. Do you want this to happen to your children? But they will do it because they've seen it. They grew up that way. The culture taught them that. They were in another romantic relationship that went south, and now they never dealt with what they did, and now they're carrying it into this relationship, and they're making this person pay for that. I can't. the causes, I call them influences. Yes.
How do you feel about clients wanting to get like your cell phone and versus calling your office, leaving a message, wait till you return for normal hours versus you being available 24/7 through a texting or emailing with your clients? What's your feelings on that?
Okay, now we're into a counseling image question. Do I let clients call me?
Yeah, on your personal cell phone or?
This is what I have just started doing recently. I have a landline in my office, and I have a cell phone that's mainly for my family. But I have allowed them to text me if like they're trying, and I tell them this, Kevin, on their first session. I'm very unconventional. I set up counseling. When I was going to counseling many years ago, I would just be getting on a roll, and the counselor would say, oh, well, our 50-minute clinical hour is over, and maybe I could see you. And I thought, I'll never do that. So I always leave enough room, and if they need to continue, they're on a good roll, I'm saying, do you want another half-hour session added on? But to answer your question, they can text me. I tell all of them, if you get in a crisis, you can text me and see if I have any wiggle room in my schedule, and we will find a way to give you a 15-minute or 20-minute mini session video. So I do let them text me, but I tell all of them, I do not answer my cell phone. I just tell them that up front. You can text.
I think what you were asking, like crisis situations.
Well, yeah, I mean, have you ever had to call the police on behalf of a client or encouraged one of them to do that for their own safety and well-being in one of those moments?
Very, very rarely. They need to already be registered with the domestic violence neighborhood place, and that's a great resource because they do believe them. If it's a crisis, I've never had it happen. They get close to a crisis. And this doesn't happen very often, but they can text, can you possibly work me in for a 30-minute mini session later today? And I almost always will do that. And then we talk through it, and then the crisis goes away. Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you, Dr. Buddy.
One of the things that I do, and we have direct lines to each one of our desks around here with a big operation. And I don't do much family counseling anymore, except for with the people that we do have, spouses that we're trying to build a family back together because we believe God made the family first. But I have a direct line that goes to my desk, and that direct line, when they leave a message, automatically is emailed to me with a message. And I can make the decision whether I feel like I need to get back in touch with them or something. So that may be something that's available on your phones.
They can text. And I tell them, I said, just like when I'm in a session with you, I turn all my electronic devices off. But I said, text me when at the end of the session I can look, and yes, I will absolutely try to get back. Very rare. Usually they just go ahead and make a lot of mistakes. I wish they would text me. But I had one just this past week. I had told her how to start detaching. There are a lot of steps in curing the victim. But the first one, or the second one, would be to start detaching just a little bit emotionally. I don't recommend announcing that to the perpetrator, but I had just gone through a session showing her how to do that a little bit. And she texted. She said, oh, it started again. It started again. And he's not speaking, and so I just texted her back at the end of the day, what'd you do? If you need to talk to me tomorrow, I'll be here. So, but you want them, the first step in the cure, again, I go back to Scripture, and it's the truth will set you free. I try to get them to see what's really happening, to see how awesome they are, how hard they're trying, how much they love this perpetrator, how much they've sacrificed, and also see their gifts and talents. Because they get to a point where they don't think there's any good about them. Yeah. Well, my husband says I'm not any good at praying, with my children. He says, I'm not good at that. They start believing that. So first thing, I clearly sit there with them and go over the truth. And because they start to lose sometimes their loving relationship with the Lord from their point of view, they think the Lord can't use them anymore, and they think they're trash. So I will literally, I mix coaching with counseling. I'll tell you that. I mix them together. And I'll say, now I'm going to quit counseling you for a minute. I'm going to do a little coach, a little life coaching here. Let's see what some of your gifts and talents and your assets are. Now, and then I'll start, and they get real quiet, really quiet, because no one has told them how precious they are in so long. And they're like little sponges. And I said, you're beautiful, you're caring, you have a big heart, you have empathy for other people going through things now, you understand, you try hard, you're taking care of these children, you're very talented in this, that, whatever they do, you're a good and faithful servant of your job, you're responsible, you're a catch. And they'll start perking up a little bit. It's like giving them a vitamin. And I have this bowl I bring down, and it's been broken but repaired with gold. And they're called kintsugi golds. Like I said, it's on the back of the book. And what happens, instead of throwing that broken bowl away, an artist fills in the cracks and doesn't try to hide the cracks either. I encourage them to say, I've been through things, I understand. And I said, you have the potential to be much more valuable than you were before. It's like somebody who grieves, they're more valuable. They understand pain, they understand heartbreak. So I began to let them see the truth, remind them that the enemy, and I believe this, and I may get in trouble with all of you right now, but I believe the enemy is working through this abuser to derail and destroy this person who has great potential for the Lord. That's just my humble opinion. But I try to get them to see how awesome they are. And then the last thing is for them to keep their side of the street clean. That's a phrase that you hear a lot in 12-step programs. It's don't become like your perpetrator. You be as gentle as you can. If you think you can't, you're about to flip. And I give them a few things they can do to break the cycle. Just clear your throat. I've got to get some water. Anything to break it, and go in there and look in the mirror at themselves in the bathroom and tell themselves how awesome they are. I teach them how to say out loud, no, I'm just part of my spirit.
She needed some water.
But yeah, get them to say that. I need to get a drink of water. And they can, or I need to go to the bathroom.
Right.
Anything to break it and not stay in it and get more beaten down, because they're about to do something or say something that they're going to regret later. We don't want that. We don't want that. So they're like kintsujis. And remember that Joseph, who was abused, God used it for good. He became more seasoned, mature. He became prime minister of Egypt. And I remind him of Romans 8:28. God can take everything you've been through, if you'll do all the other work, and you're going to use this for good. You're going to be more powerful, awesome, beautiful than you've ever been. And it changes lives. So thank you.
Miss
Sorry
Sandy,
to run
I
over
got a
you.
question,
Yes.
and it's one that Christian counselors don't like to bring up very much. And over the years, I've dealt with a lot of people. There's been some strong physical abuse in there. And I know that, you know, what we believe in divorce and the Word of God and all that. You ever have those times when you suggest to a person that it's time to?
Yep, Dr. Nussbaumer might get me for that one too. See, if that person had been hit across the room and was in the hospital, nobody would blink an eye. You need to get out of that. But you see, emotional abuse is just as bad or worse. And it's killing them, it's wiping them out. And yes, I do come to a point, they've done everything. They are becoming like a beaten up rag. They've given everything, their finances are shot, they've quit their job, they've given up their career, they've given up their family, they've given up everything, and they're locked out of the house, or they're not spoken to for months. Yes, I say, you know what, we need to.
I actually had a couple that I was working with a number of years ago that she got to the point where the only time she got out of bed was when he left,
Yeah.
going to work.
Yeah,
When he got home and she went to bed just
That's
as soon as
right.
the dishes were cleaned up and all that.
because
She was dying.
he's bringing in that hateful, cruel, devastating spirit, lying spirit. And I'll get all wound up, you don't want me to do that. But see, when he's gone, it's out of the atmosphere. No, I do, I'm sorry. But I think, and I believe based on Scripture, there's several reasons for divorce. Adultery, probably not going to be one of them in these situations, but it could be. Abandonment. Well, when a perpetrator abandons the marriage repeatedly, tells the victim, you're no good, I want to get away from you, I want out of this, you go get papers. They abandon, they leave for weeks or days. They won't speak, they have left the marriage. Now, they'll try to make it up so they can go through the cycle again, but they leave the marriage, they leave it.
It was a question that you don't hear talked about a lot.
No, you go home and pray. We do not believe in divorce. I don't either. I don't want them to. I tell them right up front. I don't want anyone to have to go through a divorce. But if your perpetrator does not stop treating you in a manner that's giving you a heart attack and you're going to die an early death, we've got to do, now it might be a separation. They don't have to do a divorce. But they've got to have some relief. Just it's horrible. So, boy, what a nasty topic. Nobody wants to talk about this. It's just not an appealing topic. So I appreciate your letting me share with you today. You've been great. And,
Thank you so
go back and
much.
just be aware.
Thank you, Dr. McKenzie.
What's going on. Thank you.